On Thursday, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced the first five projects of national interest under his One Canadian Economy Act. So, to get some reaction to that, I'm going to talk to Akaash Maharaj, who's a professor at the University of Toronto, a senior fellow at Munk School of Public Policy, and a director of Nature Canada. Welcome to the interview, Akaash.
Thank you for inviting me.
What's your general reaction to the announcement?
On the positive side, it showed that the Prime Minister is capable of moving quickly with large-scale projects. That's not something every head of government can say. He has therefore delivered on his desire to be and to appear to be nimble. I was disappointed, however, in the range of projects that he chose as his first five projects of national interest. All of them dealt with extractive industries, with hydrocarbons, also with nuclear energy. There were no projects that dealt with green energy, no projects that dealt with conservation, none that dealt with nature. It is regrettable that when people in the cabinet think about building Canada, they appear to think about building industrial infrastructure rather than social or green infrastructure.
I had somewhat the same reaction as you. On this case, though, I might actually give the Prime Minister a pass because I think there was an emphasis in this first announcement on finding shovel-ready projects. And he wanted to move quickly. He wanted to show that he could fulfill his promises from the election campaign. And it didn't surprise me whatsoever that we had the LNG Canada Phase 2 expansion. We had the Darlington small modular reactor. We had a couple of copper mines. And then we had the Montreal container port. So all of those, I would bet, were probably sitting on a shelf and could be dusted off and announced fairly quickly. Would you agree with that?
I think that's absolutely true. And indeed, one of the things that all five of these projects have in common is that they had all gone through regulatory approvals. In some cases, years ago, the LNG Phase 2 plant went through its assessment in 2015, the Darlington nuclear plant this year, and others have gone through various forms of approval between 2021 and this year. So one could say that the projects he has chosen are projects that were already underway. That does raise a different question, though, and that is, what does this expedited process really mean? Because in the first instance, it does lean very heavily on projects that have already been approved. The real question, I suppose, then is what happens next? When he has a free hand to choose projects, is he going to choose a project in the same mold, or is he going to choose projects that could only be created with public assistance and that will have long-term benefits for the country, not just immediate-term benefits for the corporations behind them?
Akash, I want to get your take on this because you do some of your work at the international level. And I did a video today arguing that there's a missing piece in the Prime Minister's strategy. And it's frankly a strategy. We don't have an overarching strategy here that ties all of these projects together. Why are we building these projects? What is the goal at the end of it? Are we just simply pivoting away from the US and now we're going to do what we've always done, just do it with different customers in Asia and Europe? Is that what? Or are we marching up the value chain on our natural resources? Are we doing clean energy technology manufacturing? How does that position us for the 21st century economy, which is obviously changing? So I'm just curious, what would be your take on that?
I think you're correct that the initial sets of projects don't reflect a grand strategy for the country. To be fair to the Prime Minister, he is in a very unlovely situation. The kinds of things we're talking about should have been done by previous governments. They should have been done at a time when governments had the luxury of proceeding carefully, methodically, and in doing so, not just diversifying our economy and helping to ensure that we're not completely dependent on any one country, the United States or any other one country, but also that we are looking towards the kinds of industries that will sustain high-paying jobs for Canadians and not just keep us as drawers of water and hewers of wood. The Prime Minister is therefore under tremendous pressure to deliver very quickly. And already there are polls suggesting that while he remains very popular, some of that popularity is beginning to wane as people, somewhat unfairly, are expecting him to make a difference really quickly. With that kind of political pressure, he cannot help but, shall we say, play to Canada's existing strengths rather than build new strengths. But in the end, he will have to build new strengths. It may be necessary for him to purchase some popularity and some public patience by these sorts of projects. The real test will be if he's able to husband that political support, how will he spend it?
Yeah, if you compare his approach to China's, for example, where 2015, 20 years ago, they had a very deliberate strategy to develop out clean energy technologies on the supply side, wind, solar, and batteries, and on the demand side, electric vehicles, batteries, heat pumps, industrial arc furnaces, that sort of thing. And they went about it very methodically, and it's been wildly successful for them. But even Joe Biden, starting in 2021, took a more strategic approach to developing clean energy manufacturing and technology deployment in the United States. It seems like Carney, some of his, he's kind of ahead of himself. And maybe it has to do with the political pressure you're talking about. But he did say that an industrial policy is they're working on it and will release it fairly soon. Does that give you some comfort that maybe there'll be some meat on these bones?
I'm encouraged that he recognizes the need for an industrial policy. And indeed, relatively few Canadian prime ministers have talked about industrial policy for some time. Joe Biden had the advantage of knowing that he was going to be president for 4 years. The Communist Party of China believes that it will be in power for 100 years. That allows those governments to plan quite far down the road. Mark Carney can probably count on 2 years with minority government. It may stretch to 4, but it would be foolish to bank on that. He's therefore in this difficult position where the answers to the challenges that face our country are long-term structural changes. He may not have a long term. It is a political conundrum in any democracy. How do you maintain the short-term popularity that is necessary to keep you getting re-elected while working on the long-term issues that are the only way to advance the public good? It is possible, but it's an act of statesmanship. And for Carney, he has both an advantage and a disadvantage. His advantage is that he doesn't have much of a political background and seems to be accustomed to thinking about longer term issues, not thinking in electoral cycles. His weakness is that he does not have much of a political background. And the question of political management is clearly alien to him and to many of the people around him. I've been surprised by the number of times he has made mistakes, political mistakes, and candidly rookie mistakes. He has, to give him his due, been relatively quick at doubling back and doing what he can to mitigate those mistakes. But Carney is learning quickly that one of the differences between being the governor of a national bank and being prime minister is that the reason we have independent governors of the Bank of Canada is precisely to insulate them from public opinion so that they can be free to make decisions, for example, on interest rates without having to worry about whether Canadians are screaming or cheering. You can't ignore whether Canadians are screaming or cheering when you're prime minister.
I I did a video the other day arguing that the fact that Mark Carney spent 15 years at Goldman Sachs Canada, it's a very prestigious global investment banker and financial advisor, but then he brought over a former CEO of Goldman Sachs Canada, Tim Hodgson, to be his Minister of Natural Resources. And then he installed Natural Resources Energy CEO Don Farrell as head of the Major Projects Office. To me, those are all signals that the oil and gas and resources are going to be very, very high on their agenda. And maybe, this strategic approach or response to the changing global economy, the electrifying global economy, may not get the attention it deserves.
I suspect you're right. One of the dynamics that favored Carney during the last federal election is that, on the one hand, he was well known as the governor of the Bank of England and the former governor of the Bank of Canada. So people felt confidence in that public profile. On the other hand, he had never held elected office of any kind in any jurisdiction. And so he was something of a cipher. People were able to project upon them whatever hopes they had. And that dynamic became especially pronounced in the last election, where the electorate was highly polarized, where people were often voting less in hope than in fear of what people on the opposite end of the political spectrum from them might do. But ultimately, Mark Carney is behaving like exactly what he is. He's a banker, and he is accustomed to measuring progress in things like profit and loss, shareholder value, GDP growth, and accustomed to measuring them over relatively short spaces of time. That is one of the great differences between being a public servant and being a private actor, between being a prime minister and being a banker. The metrics of success when you're prime minister are things like what will happen in 50 years, what will happen in 100 years. Am I improving not just the total wealth of my country, but am I improving the fairness of the distribution of that wealth? Those are questions that are vital to the national interest. They're also questions that aren't captured by a banker's balance sheet. Carney's heart seems to be in the right place. His experience, though, may be in other places.
Well, the video I referred to earlier was titled "Bait and Switch." I voted for values Carney and got Goldman Sachs Carney, and essentially, the argument is that given his background and given the place that Goldman Sachs has in corporate Canada, and in his other appointments that I referred to, it was almost inevitably that a lot of these projects, and maybe every one of them, will be part of the big corporate Canada that he's accustomed to dealing with. And they're the incumbents. They will do what they've always done. They'll just want more of it and with different customers.
Well, if you were a client of Goldman Sachs, you're not the kind of person who's afraid of being in the unemployment line. And if that's the universe of people that you've been dealing with, it does give you a perspective on life. All of us are creatures of history, and all of us are creatures of our background. It takes an act of will not to be a prisoner of your own experiences. Between his time as governor of the Bank of England and making a leap into politics, Carney did spend time with the United Nations working as an advisor to the Secretary General on climate change and financial issues bound up with climate change. I wonder, was he doing that because he was now free to explore his genuine interest, or was he doing that because he understood that he needed to mitigate or to round off the corners on his appearance as being a banker and someone of high finance? It's really, I've always said, don't pay attention to what politicians say, pay attention to what they do. His first few steps as prime minister have been largely for the benefit of large corporations. He might be doing that because it is the first step in a longer journey. Time will tell.
Let's wrap up the interview this way, Akaash. I've been getting a lot of feedback from my audience, which would be very pro Carney. That's the place we occupy on the political spectrum. And I've been on record as saying that I really like him. I mean, what's not to like about an Oxford PhD with his pedigree when you have to deal with major economic challenges? I mean, that's a great. So while we have spent the last 10 minutes or so criticizing some of his choices, some of his lack of strategy, and so on, I think it would be fair to say that his general direction is okay. He's doing some of the right things and he's got the right, attitude and approach, but there needs to be work done. His strategy, his approach has got lots of rough edges, and they need to be sanded down and made to work a lot better than they have. Would you agree?
I think that's true. I think it's often true of many prime ministers. I think that Carney, I don't mean to damn him with faint praise, but I think Carney means well. I think that he has a vision for Canada that goes beyond the balance sheet. I also think that, as you point out, he is very well equipped in his skills and in his background to deal with a moment of financial crisis and a moment of high diplomacy. Politics is a different world, though. And the question, one of the qualities that he will need to balance off his experiences and his skills, which are undoubtedly significant, is a level of humility. That is to say, often people who are very skilled lose touch with what they don't know. Carney has all the skills to take Canada in the right direction. He seems to have his heart in the right place. He does not have experience in navigating political waters, but there are plenty of people within his party, within his caucus, who do have those skills. If he leans on them, then he will be able to press those skills in the correct direction. If he doesn't, if he falls victim of believing that because he's often the smartest person in the room, that he is the smartest person in the country, then those skills quickly become a liability rather than an asset. But I am hopeful.
Akaash, thank you very much. This has been a very insightful conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.